with the best father and son team on the internet. It's time for Homie and the Dude.
What is up, everyone? This is Homie and the Dude, the father and son TTRPG podcast. And we are delighted to be joined today by Greg Tito and Shelly Mazzanoble, the co-hosts of the official Dungeons & Dragons podcast, Dragon Talk, and the co-authors of Welcome to Dragon Talk, inspiring conversations about Dungeons & Dragons and the people who play it. ... Guys, thank you for joining us. How are you doing?
So good. So happy to be here. Thank you so much for having us.
This is really exciting. I can't wait. Now, I have a question already, but I'm going to wait until you get started.
Amazing.
Amazing.
Yeah, well, this is the thing. You guys are podcasters, so I mean, some element of this probably should be an exploration of, because there is a dynamic with a two-person podcast team and a one-person guest or a two-person guest thing. So we should talk about that a little bit, maybe.
Totally.
100%. Well, what's your question? Go for it. Shoot.
I actually don't know which one is Homie and which one is the Dude.
Listen. You can ask that, but then that would mean we could ask other questions that you might decline to answer as well about the employer that you have. So let's just park that for a second. We may circle back.
It's a mystery. I like it.
So some deep lore with Homie and the Dude that we actually have revealed it in one of the very first videos that we made, but we actually have then since not mentioned it and will not tell people. It's for you guys. Who do you think is the Homie and who do you think is the Dude? Is maybe a better question.
Well, we'll tell you at the end, I think. I think that might be like at the end of the entire, people. But Shelly, you feel like you were about to make a prognostication there.
I was. Well, I'll tell you who I think now, and then I'll tell you at the end who I think.
Amazing.
First of all, is one of you Homie and one of you is Dude? It's not going to be like, they're not actually even here.
It's our cousin and our...
You're 100% right. One of us is Homie and one of us is Dude.
Do you know who's...
Okay.
I indeed do.
Okay.
You guys, what? I'm going to say Tom is the Dude.
Okay.
All
right.
Okay.
We'll put
That's
a pin
good
on that.
theology. I like that.
Okay.
We'll put a pin on that. Maybe we'll reveal it afterwards. Yeah.
So
I've
got to ask you guys. You've written a book about podcasting. All these amazing conversations that you guys have had with, a plethora of guests. And I've been listening to your guys' podcast for a long time. And some of your guests are some of my favorite people within our industry that you've had on, and some of the topics that you've talked about have been absolutely incredible. I want to ask you, because obviously for us, we have over the years, that we've done this, learned techniques, learned little things that we do, things that allow us to have good cohesion as co-hosts. What kind of advice would you guys give to people who are new at this or up and coming, or how to really make the conversation feel whole and interesting for people?
Oh man, that's a big question. I think, honestly, the best part about podcasting with Shelly was that we didn't have to think about that at all.
That's awesome.
In some ways, I think we always, and it's similar to the way you have set up, your conversational podcast, where we always want it to be like people hanging out and getting to know each other and no stakes, right? Because sometimes we have people who come in who are nervous or don't want to say anything wrong, and they might be their first experience on this type of a podcast type thing. And I think one asset that both Shelly and I have is that we can put people at ease pretty easily, and that's the secret sauce out of all of it, is just making it a conversation and not too dissimilar from just meeting people at a party and getting to know them a little bit more. Now that can be easier for some people and harder for some people, so it's about giving folks the tools that they need to feel comfortable, whatever that may be. Usually it's just a joke or an aside or self-deprecating humor about ourselves. It tends to just kind of put people at ease, and then you get great stuff from it. So I don't know if there's any secret sauce. I think that's what it is. But luckily, like I said, Shelly and I kind of fell into that from the get-go.
Yeah,
I love
adding. Oh, sorry.
Go ahead. I was just going to say
that.
That Greg's as we're talking
See,
about
podcasting.
yeah, so good. I'll just put a little brief little thing in here, and then over to you, Shelly. Totally agree with the self-deprecating. That little piece right there seems to have worked really well for us, especially with people that are a little bit unsure, unfamiliar, or unexperienced with this type of space. But yeah, for sure. Go on, Shelly.
Yeah. Okay. So all of what Greg said. Now I remember I think we were at Gamehole Con and people were like, oh, I love Dragon Talk. I really love the banter between you and Greg. And I thought, banter? Like, that's just me and Greg. Like, what? It didn't occur to me that like I thought people were just like, oh, just fast forward through the Greg and Shelly part and get to the guests. But Greg and I just are like really good friends in real life. So, and even though we worked together, oftentimes when we went into the studio to record Dragon Talk, that was the first time we saw each other like all week and actually could like catch up with each other. So it was sort of a genuine like catching up and excited to see each other. But if you saw Greg and I recording Dragon Talk and then saw Greg and I at a party together, it would be like the same energy, the same tone. But I also think that we feel so lucky to be talking to some of the most passionate, talented creators out there, and that are lending their time to us to talk to us about the work that they're doing with D&D and around D&D. So I think the genuine interest that we have in getting to know these people also makes it easier. Obviously, you don't want to do a podcast about French cooking if you hate cooking. Like the topic needs to be something that you're obviously excited to talk about, and hopefully the people you're talking to are equally excited about, which in our case they are.
100%. And it's one of those things where I think, as you said, you're so passionate about it. And I love what you said, Greg, as well, to follow on from what Tom said, the way that you talked about being self-deprecating, also just, making people feel comfortable. I think that's one of the things where I'm not sure if you guys have had any guests where, you've, been in the studio and your heart's like, as you're like sat there, like, and they join the call and you're like, oh my God, breathe. And it's one of those ones where you have to get comfortable as well as making sure that, then they're comfortable and all that kind of stuff. So I really like that you mentioned that. I also wanted to mention, you mentioned a word banter. That's such an English term. I didn't know that I didn't know that had made it over to America at this point. That's amazing. I'm so stoked to hear an American say the word banter. That's awesome.
I actually think it'd be good to get your clarification, Shelley, on what your definition of banter is. Because in England or in the UK, banter has a little edge to it. There's a little bit of like what they would
jabbing at each other,
taking the piss, or like going back, a little bit of like back and not like in a bad way, but like friendly. I don't know what the word is in America anymore because I haven't
jibing, jibing,
friendly little digs, but like in a funny, in a clever way, that type of thing. Is it the same?
I think when Americans say banter, we're more like chatty, like like very conversational, back and forth, a lot like the back and forth part, but not necessarily what did you say, taking the piss out?
Yeah. Taking the piss is a friendly way of saying joking with someone, having a friendly joke. It's not like ill-intended or anything like that.
It's like me being like, oh, Tom, you old man, like that kind of thing. And like, that kind of like, you're making jokes at each other's expense with the knowledge that you're just having fun and having a laugh, basically. It would be a good description.
It's the self-deprecating without the self. It's the deprecating of your partner.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah,
it is.
I love that. And I love that, Shelly mentioned about catching up on the podcast. We would totally do that. And then sometimes we would be catching up in the office and be like, oh, no, hold on. Don't tell that story because I want to hear it for the first time when we're on air, because it'll just be, you'll get my more genuine laughs that way if it's not the, second time I've heard the story. I used to love that thing we would do, especially when we were doing live Twitch recordings of our stuff where we had to fill more than just the hour or so that would be on the podcast. We had to fill sometimes, 2 or 3 hours worth of content, and that always got a little bit harder. It's a much different thing when you're trying to fill up that amount of weekly time.
Yeah, and you want to save those little gems, right? Because the first time you say it is often the most authentic. If you try to replicate it, it somehow doesn't come out exactly as you said it the first time. And we've had it before as well, where we're having a bit of a pre-talk before we go into a podcast with a guest. And all of a sudden we're talking and it's gone to
Oh,
5
yeah.
minutes and 10 minutes and 15 minutes. We're like, holy shit, let's hit record because this is actually some good content.
Yeah,
we're
right. This
missing
is gold.
now.
Yes.
Thanks for watching this episode. We really appreciate you supporting Homie and the Dude.
Please hit us with the Holy Trinity, like our Facebook page, subscribe to the YouTube channel, and follow us on Instagram. Just search @Homie and the Dude. It all really helps.
Those guys really help. Maybe that's another little advice thing, because those little 5-10 minute things are sometimes really instrumental, because you can build rapport and then call it back in the first 5-10 minutes of the first recording of the podcast. So like sometimes that really helps, honestly, because it sets people at ease. It's not the first time they're saying those words out loud, or be like, oh yeah, tell that story again. Because sometimes, you know, you want that initial laughter without having the story be told, but sometimes the second or third time a story is told, it's actually told better. So, you know, it's like a good dungeon master. You kind of have to read the room and kind of understand what might be the best thing to do in a situation.
100%. You're dead on. You absolutely hit the nail on the head there, dead on. And I think you know, it's very much one of those where you have to just understand the person that you're with. And like you said, you know, it's easier for the person that you know really well, for you guys to have a catch up and be like, save that for like our first reaction, because it will be easier. Rather than, like you said, someone who's coming in, you know, maybe feeling a bit nervous, to get them maybe to repeat it or, you know, tell a story again, does actually, you know, give them that opportunity to be like, oh, okay, I've done this once. I've gotten through this once. I can do it again. There was a laugh at the end of this story, so I know that, you know, it's likely to get another one. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And that works. Something you also said there is, you mentioned like the 3-hour like podcasting zone where you're like just really in this like deep space of like conversation and having to, you know, keep the ball rolling and keep it interesting. So we actually do an MMA podcast with when UFC events are on. We do live commentary for the fights, and then also in between the fights do a lot of like talking with our chat and whatnot. And that's one of those ones where we go for like 7 hours sometimes, and it is one of those ones where you're just like, oh my God, like I hear myself saying things and I'm like, I am literally just talking absolute shit. I don't know what's happening, but it's just coming out and it's just filling air, because that's what it is at this point, you know?
Yeah, for sure.
Absolutely. Yeah.
That's a talent for sure. I love that you guys have a MMA and a D&D podcast. You're very well balanced. I like it.
Here's the thing. We find that there's a really big crossover when it comes to combat in D&D for us, because when it comes into combat, as people who have loved martial arts, done martial arts, and you know, been in that world for nearly 15 years, Tom and I, when we then came into D&D a couple years ago, we were like, oh, well, combat's really fun, because it's like, oh, I'm gonna, you know, do this move that I've seen, you know, people do or, you know, I've done in training and things like that. And it's something that we actually found has amplified our D&D play and things like that, actually, which is really interesting.
It's
such a weird niche.
Yeah, it's a weird niche. And
Less weird nowadays, though. Those worlds are crossing over more.
Yeah, because I think both of those entities, so D&D and MMA / the UFC, are having a real moment right now, like globally. And so I think both of them are very much, you know, expanding their presence in pop culture right now. So I guess there is a little bit of just like Venn diagram crossover, but you know, probably not a
wrestling in America as well too, right? Like how that's had like a bit of a growth, and there's even more fantasy involved in that, right? So that makes total sense. Yeah, and what you're saying about having that interest in combat too, that reminds me of Bob Salvatore's, like going back to how he was a bouncer and was a you know, much more interested in writing the action of his in the Drizzt novels, about how describing that was important to him, and he was able to use actual knowledge of
bar
not
fights.
bar fights and MMA things in order to like kind of build the visceralness of those combat things. And right, it's you need that. And actually, as I'm writing fantasy now, that's like a not a strong suit for me, because I'm like, I don't understand how to. I just know that it's fun and it gets exciting and you stab them, but like, you know, I've had people read it and be like, you know, that's not how sword combat works. You know that, right? And I'm like,
no, I do not.
Please tell me.
Do you know what? It's such an interesting point, Greg, because, you know, we watch movies now, we read books, you know, and there's television and anime and all this stuff. And, you look at things where actual martial arts is being used, or you look at, maybe Asian television or Asian theater and things like that, where you're getting a lot of these, kung fu influences, karate, old style Japanese judo and jujitsu being mixed in. And you can really see the difference between like, someone who, like you said, who might not know like what's going on versus you watch, Jackie Chan do his thing and you're like, whoa, like that's on another level. Like I thought The Rock throwing, Vin Diesel through a window was interesting, but wow, Jackie Chan's using a ladder to hit that guy. That's crazy. Do you know what I mean? And so I fully get that. It's hard to get those high levels if you haven't partaken in it, which is why I think for us, when we started D&D, we were very much in a place of like, where do we go? This is all nervous. We want to be good, but, we want to, put something on the internet, but we're so nervous about that space. And you guys mentioned a minute ago that, it's the reason you guys love Dragon Talk is because you're so passionate about, D&D and the whole industry and what we're a part of. How did you guys get started? Where did this journey begin for you guys in terms of like, how did you fall in love with D&D? And then, years down the line, we're here, so how did this start for you guys?
My origin story begins with my employer telling me I had to learn how to play Dungeons and Dragons.
I love that so much.
It's true. I had worked at Wizards of the Coast for years before I touched Dungeons and Dragons. I knew it was there. I knew that people were playing it. I knew we published it. I was like, not for me. I'm not going to be a Dungeons and Dragons player. Nope. But I got a job on the publishing team, which I was really excited about. I was going to be working on our new children's books and our adult novels. And this is the same team that publishes the rule books, the adventures, the source books. And so I was very close to them now, but still I'm like, I am working on children's novels. I do not need to know how to play your silly game. I'm still going to resist it as much as possible. I will read these children's books. You guys just go make your little dice towers and talk in your funny accents and make up words with lots of consonants and apostrophes that nobody can pronounce, but go ahead, have fun. And then my boss was like, hey, you should really learn how to play Dungeons and Dragons. It might actually help you in your career. Oh, okay. We got a group together with like 5 other people. Only one of them had played D&D before. So I was already feeling a little bit better that I was among other new people. The Dungeon Master was super into it. This was 3.5 edition. And he was like, I'll help you make your character. But really, like, he made the character. I had no idea how. The only thing I could do was say, I want to be an elf. And I think sorcerer sounds cool, which it did. And then he did all the rest. But it seemed like so much work. My God, like all these words and all this math and all these like erasing with pencils and rolling dice. Like, just give me a character. Like, why can't I just pick the thimble out of a box and start playing? What is with this game? And then we sat down to play our first game. He handed me my little miniature that would represent my character. And as soon as I saw her, do you want to see her? She's right here. She's always right next to me. This is my little mini. This is Astrid Bellagio. And I, without being asked, I just started making up this huge backstory about her. Like, she's of the Bellagio family of the Las Vegas,
the Fountain Bellagio family,
the Las Vegas Bellagios. Perhaps you've heard of them. Best breakfast buffet in all of America. And after that first game, well, probably minutes within that first game, it became very clear to me that I had been so wrong about this game for my whole life. And I became very angry that my parents never found me a D&D game when I was a kid, because I would have been great at it. But it was like, God, like, this is it. It's just us together telling stories, making things up, having these really fun adventures. And like, the cleric is like diving in front of arrows to save me, like the little frail sorcerer in the back, and I'm like casting magic missiles and like knocking things down. Like, everybody was assisting, everybody was supporting each other, we were cheering for each other. It was an amazing 2 hours that was only supposed to be that one game. That like, really, our bosses were just like, just learn how to play, move on. And we were like, we must continue playing. And we played for 3 years every week. we just
Perfect.
kept right
That's how
on
it goes.
going. Yeah. And I became like very obsessed with the idea of like, I know there are people out there like me that have been very wrong about this game, that just don't see themselves as a D&D player or fan. And I must tell them they are wrong. They must find this game. It just can do such amazing things for you. So that is the crusade I've been on ever since.
A valiant one indeed. What about you? What about you, Greg?
Somewhat similar in that I got to D&D later as an adult. I loved fantasy when I was a kid. I loved reading The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings, and read a lot of D&D adjacent stuff like Dragonlance and all those novels. And I found the Dungeon Master's Guide on my brother's shelf, and we actually don't know how it got there. I have a very strict mother, a Catholic, and we think it might have just kind of got there through a hand-me-down box somehow. My older brothers didn't really care about it, but I found it and I was like, this is amazing. This is like I can play in all of the worlds that I've been reading about and watching animated movies about. Like this is great. Never was able to get a group together because of the aforementioned Catholic background. And then I've a couple of fits and starts here and there in college, but nothing really amounted to anything. And it wasn't until I was living in New York City for a few years, making theater, doing stand-up comedy, and that I was like, well, wait a second, I can play D&D now. There's no one telling me I can't play D&D. I'm an adult. I can do things. And so I found a group. It was like, online when, forums and things were relatively new in the early 2000s. We ended up finding this amazing group of creative folks who, many of which went on to do stuff in the TRPG space later on. One of them works at Paizo now. One of them has created lots of stuff together. And so we had like a really great 3.5 era campaign, lasted also for around 3 years. And it was this wonderful storytelling experience. And I kind of got hooked from there and started writing more about D&D and video games. I got hired as a game journalist at the website called The Escapist, and started pitching, in addition to video game stuff, as much tabletop content as I could. And then was lucky enough to get hired at Wizards in 2015 to make that a more permanent part of my life, where it's basically just proselytizing about the wonders of this game. Because like Shelly, I agree, people are better people when they play Dungeons and Dragons. They have empathy, they know how to work as a team, they know how to listen to each other, they are really into cool swords and casting magic spells, which are super fun. They are miniature collectors. I don't know, I just feel like there's so much many disciplines, creative disciplines, that go into this hobby that everybody can get something out of it, whether it's artwork or, like I said, miniature painting or maps or performance, costumes, cosplay, like that whole, I just love that there's so many different facets to this game. And it's been great having this podcast, Dragon Talk, to be able to talk to all these people and elevate all of those things. And I think that's, just to circle back to what you're talking about, podcasting and our genuine interest in it. And I think that's, again, another part of why this podcast has lasted as long as it did, and why we've interviewed more than 300 people, is that we just genuinely love hearing these stories. We love hearing about the different ways that people interact with this game. And then there's just so many different ways. Like there's acting, there's performance, there's politicians who play it, Hollywood creators, directors, writers, educators, mental health providers, people who are just people who are doing stuff, but then just happen to have a game that lasts 4 decades and has overarching plots and storylines that are going on and weaving all together. So it's been a really just long and amazing journey. And I think we just love telling more people about it and hopefully getting more people into it with that caveat that, even when I started in 2015, there was enough of a stereotype still about D&D players, similar to what Shelly was saying. And I think over time we've broken each one of those stereotypes down, and it's like, no, anybody can play it. You can love MMA fighting and like D&D. Like, I don't think you could say that 20 years ago, right? The people who were into MMA 20 years ago be like, what? D&D? It's stupid, but it's totally changed now, and I love that. I love that there's so many different parts of it. And my camera just dropped a second. Hold on. Go ahead.
No, you're good. No, I love both of your answers, and they both sort of. I've been trying to explore what is it about D&D. Certainly, there's a
Me
personal reason
too.
for me, but psychologically, like what is happening in our brains, what is happening in our like deeper within us that. And I guess, Greg, your point is there's different things for different people. I get that. But I also feel like I want it to be like something more, which is it's tapping into something in the human experience
Yes.
that we are not getting enough of, that we maybe used to get when we all used to sit around a campfire, or and there was one person standing in front of us. They might have been in a headdress, or they might have been telling scary stories or inspirational stories about combats and about history and about families and about, there's something in there, it feels like to me, above and beyond. Yes, I want it for comedy, I want it for role playing, I love minis, I love, it feels like there's more in there. And Shelly,
Like that soul kind of toucher.
the
Totally.
storytelling bit.
That's so, I am with you, Tom. I have tried for years to figure out what is it about this game that has kept people in it for decades, for officially decades. There are people who learned how to play D&D in the 70s that still love Dungeons and Dragons. Even if they're not currently playing it, they are still very much fans of the game. And I love when we talk to somebody who is an adult and learned how to play it as a child, and we'll say, like, tell us about when you first discovered D&D. And it's like they just go back, like you can see them going back in time, and it's like every like smell, every texture, like the color of the carpet and your friend's basement, and like his mom was upstairs making spaghetti sauce, and like this was like cousin Anthony from Portland came to town, and he was like, you guys want to play a game? And it was like super mysterious. They didn't know what we didn't know what we were doing, and my character died within 15 minutes, and it was amazing. and they just clicks for them. It just they just stay in that moment. Like there's not they never lose the fandom. They're still friends with those people that they played D&D with all those years ago, because obviously D&D really does help bond you to people. But I am with you. Like I can't figure it out. Like there is something psychological that it taps into, and it's like, that innate need to just be together, to tell stories, to share. And D&D does that really well, but it's like something beyond that. And I get to see it a little bit when I introduce a kid to Dungeons and Dragons. Like you can actually like see it happening when they're like, whoa, wait, I can do that. I could just do this. And they get really excited, really into their characters, really into the story. And then they leave the table and they're still just like chattering together, like, did you see, like, oh, wasn't that funny when we did this thing? And I'm like, it's happening. And years from now, when somebody asks them how they got into D&D, and they're going to be like, oh, it was our neighbor's mom taught us how to play, and she gave us so many snacks, and it was her son was a total weirdo, and he kept casting spells out of his butt, and like, whatever. But it's like I've written, this is my third book about D&D, because I keep trying to tap into like, why is this game so special? There is no other game, there's no other brand, like no other book. Like I'm thinking about what was I into when I was a kid. Like nothing that I'm still really passionate about. And I loved Sweet Valley High books, but I don't care about Sweet Valley High as an adult. I'm sorry, I don't. I don't know. I don't know what it is. Maybe we can, one day we'll figure it out. But
do you think the Sweet Valley High turned into your love of Bravo television?
Oh, 100%. Like 100.
So it's still there a little bit. But I like what you're saying, Tom. Like I've used that campfire analogy comparison a lot, because I think it does, in some ways, that act of sitting around a table or a campfire telling stories is what makes us human. Like it is the thing that changes us from being animals just going to get a meal as much as we can. Like that's that community, that sense of being with other people and having a shared reality that's not the reality that everyone is currently in. is so rare, and when you get to do it, and I'm not saying every single D&D session is a transcendent experience, like what we're describing here, but when it clicks, when it is that transcendent experience, there is nothing like that. The only thing that I think that is similar, not the same, but similar, is music. Going to a concert and having that back and forth between everybody in the crowd and everybody up on stage, and that emotional play back and forth is kind of the thing. So if you combine that with the storytelling and the campfire, like that's the power of what D&D is. Like it actually ends up being something that is more than us. More than our reality that we're able to, mundanely experience. It's going to another plane, right? And I think that's why so many D&D stories have that part of, those tropes of like, no, you're ascending, you're going to the ethereal plane, you're going to, these other weird versions of what reality is, and tapping into the myth of that. And I think that's really cool. And something also clicked with me a little bit, and I think that's while we were talking, which is that's why I think sometimes religious people rail against Dungeons and Dragons, because like, no, that's our domain. We're supposed to be doing that
Great point.
for people.
It's a great point.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a really solid point. And do you know what? So a couple of things that I want to talk about that you both said, because I think.
Can I say something afterwards as well?
Yeah, go for it. Yeah. I just want to pack in some of this. So first of all, Shelly, I had the same experience. I was at a boarding school for many years, and I was like a jock, sports lad. Like I would, lots of sports, lots of like partying and stuff like that. And I had this like inner nerd that was like locked away basically. And my drama teacher was the guy who really like unlocked it for me, because I did drama with him and then went on and studied that. And, he really unlocked that. And he introduced me to D&D 3.5. And as someone who is profusely dyslexic, when I was making my character, I was again like, just so much maths. What are you doing to me? Why? Like, dude, and like I have to write it in pencil, and I already don't spell things correctly.
It. Oh, so much pencil shaving.
Exactly. And you're just like, this is crazy. So I actually drifted away from D&D for a very long time, and came back to it as an adult a few years ago, but always loved like the moments that I did have in school playing with those people once I got past the maths bit and whatnot. And that bit of like, especially for me as a young person, just being so contradictory to who I was at that time in my life. I was so not a D&D player, and yet it just enlightened me in a way that, and I think there's moments in my life that I realized, I need to just be me. I need to just be honest to who I am. I need to just be the truth of who I am. And at this point, there's only one version of me, because I try and live that pretty perpetually. But at that time, that was one of the things that unlocked that for me. I remember being like, whoa, I can be, like you said, I can shoot spells out of my butt. I feel like that's okay here. I feel like that's okay.
It's a safe space for butt casting.
Exactly. And so I felt really, really, comfortable in that. And I can't tell you how much that switch, like you said, it's almost like a penny dropping, and you're just like, whoa. And I've never had a person that, and I have now, like I seem to majority run D&D for new players at this point, except for like great. our actual play stream that we do. I'm constantly, introducing friends and family. And also the moment anyone asks me, Bodhi, what do you do for work? And I mention, this, they're like, oh my God, I love Stranger Things and D&D. Can you DM for me? And I'm like, let me look at my schedule, and I'll book you in for a one shot. Let's get a one shot in first, and then we'll see where we go from there. And every person has been so stoked and so happy. And, I've had tatted up people at my table who are like skinheads, all the way through to like one of my bosses who was a staunch feminist, who used to like just have a go at me all the time. It sat across from me in elf ears and a tiara. And I'm just like, what is happening right now? Like, I can't, this is intense to like deal with. But, I really, really resonated with what you said there. And Greg, something that you mentioned, and I want to just self-deprecate. People who have watched our show before know that in the past I've struggled with drug addiction, and it's something that's been an issue in my life. And playing D&D is like doing drugs. Like it is, it's exactly that same, like it's that same addictive, like you're just like, I want to know more. I want this plot to never end. It's why we love binge watching TV. It's why, you know, if you you get a new video game, you play it for hours with your buddies, you know, when you were younger, you'd sit around and just go at it for hours because we want to absorb as much of it as possible. And I think that's something for me that I noticed almost instantly was I was like, whoa, it's like, this is really addictive. Like it's, and like, I have that personality. So at this point, I'm, you know, 2 years in and a whole homebrew world later. And I'm like, oh my God, what's happened? And, you know, and the other thing you said that I also feel that same kind of connection with is music as well. And I fully agree with you. There's nothing more pure in my life than rolling a Nat 20 and hearing a guitar solo. Like those two things hit me in a place where I'm just like, oh, like it just warms every part of me and I feel great. And I think even further, you mentioned like at a concert, you know, when you're listening to live music, I would say, especially with things like electronic music and heavy metal, where you have mosh pits, you have, you know, big group kind of interactions where the crowd is moving and interacting with each other. It's weird. It takes you to a place that's like, that is transcendent and beautiful. So I couldn't agree more with anything that you guys said. And that is why anyone and everyone who, you know, has the opportunity should dive into D&D because it will elevate you in ways. And you know, I mentioned drugs, which can be perceived as a negative thing, which I fully understand. And what I want to say, you know, in particular is that this is like a positive drug. It teaches you how to communicate better. It teaches you how to, you know, interact with people better. It teaches you how to love people better, how to also in touch with yourself. Like how many people come out, you know, because they play, you know, a different gendered character in D&D, or, you know, they play a different, you know, it's one of those things. So much of that brings out the true you. And so I'm the biggest advocate at this point. I tell everyone, I'm like, yo, D&D. And they're like, are you sure? I'm like, yes, D&D, trust me.
The only thing I wanted to say before we go to your time is that I love what you said about how having a guitar solo and rolling a Nat 20 can feel very similar. But when you play a bard, you can have both those things happen at the same time.
Nice.
And it is the best. It really is.
True. No, the only thing I would add is, you know, when you were saying that whether it's music, I also think perhaps, I'm not a comedian, but I am intrigued by this aspect of group improv, like up on a stage, like maybe Second City. Like if they're popping off and they're really like vibing off of each other and the story is evolving and also the crowd is interacting, I'm thinking that might be some sort of related feeling as well. But as far as like books or movies or games, D&D, there's no comparison.
I was going to say
there's no comparison.
Anime is maybe the closest, but even then it's so far. It's so far.
You cannot compare D&D. It's not a fair fight. It isn't. D&D has the world of possibilities at your disposal every session. And you just can't have that. Even if it's a great book and I love the storyline, that's fantastic. That's an experience. But it's completely different and you should not even, it's not a comparison really. It's a whole other thing. It's, you know, as far as entertainment, it's in its own category that I have not been able to find or replicate very easily. What do you think about this?
It's passive entertainment versus active entertainment. I think that's the way I think about it, right? Where like you can certainly get something out of, and I do watching movies and television, but like every once in a while, I'm just like, I just don't want to sit on my butt right now. I want to be involved.
You can't impact that story. That is just, it is going to be told.
Yeah, exactly.
And it will end, and that is it.
Yeah.
It's also with like RPG, like video games, even if you take like things like the Elder Scrolls series, where you have expansive worlds, deep lore, you know, amazing plots. You can't walk up to every door and open that door and go into every building and, you know, mess with whatever. You can't talk to any person you want on the street because some of them are just locked off based on, you know, like areas, you know, just game boundaries. Where D&D, you know, if your dungeon master is, you know, I'm not going to say good enough because that's not the correct word, but if your dungeon master is willing enough, then you should be able to talk to any person in a bar. You should be able to walk into any door. You should be able to venture as far away from the main plot or as close to it as you wish to. And that's what it should be. You know, that's the truest form of storytelling. I think might exist on this planet at this point in time.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. The other thing, we've had this conversation a little bit on Dragon Talk, and somebody brought this up, which I hadn't thought about before, but a close-ish comparison, Bodhi, you can probably speak to this, is sports. It's being part of a team, because like there is like that community that you build together, like you're all trying to accomplish a goal, you all have a different role, it's that supporting of each other, and it really does feel like community, like these are my people, which I feel like when I play D&D. Also, like a little bit as, you know, being a spectator of a sport, although you can't really influence the outcome of what's happening in the actual game, but there is also that sense of belonging, and we all, you know, are rooting for the same team. We all want the same, we're probably wearing the same shirts and hats and, you know, out there together. But I feel like there's a little bit of, there can be a little bit of similarity between sports and your D&D party.
And that's what spawned, I think, the video streaming RPG consuming of that type of content is like, actually, I think we're a little bit similar to the D&D or the sports fandom that you're talking about, Shelly, where like people who go to see a football game or match, a football match, as you would say, you know, right? Like they're not actively doing it, but they're rooting for their people. They want them to succeed.
Yes.
And the failures are balanced with hopefully, you know, the successes and things like that. And I think that's what people are doing when they're watching Dimension 20 or Critical Role. Like they feel that kind of like fandom, and they want to, you know, have their favorites succeed, or, you know, see the interactions between them happen. And I think it is very similar to you know, sports fandom in that regard. Sorry, but you guys were going to say stuff.
Can I ask you a question? Because so Tom has been was a professional basketball coach for many years. And I was a player for Tom at one point. He coached one of my teams at one point as well as just a side gig. Did you ever get like Dungeon Master vibes when you were a coach? Like, you know, we reference how, you know, playing on a team is like, you know, being, you know, being the players. Do you get D&D, like, do you get Dungeon Master vibes from being a coach sometimes?
So I don't know about Dungeon, because I've only been a Dungeon Master. I've tried it once, and it's just, I'd rather be a player. I'd rather kind of get into role playing. That's kind of my vibe in D&D. But what I would say is there are qualities of D&D play, and there are qualities of experience in sports. So if you have a team that is really connected, that is, you know, you can actually know what that player is going to do just by looking at them. You're one step ahead of the situation. And I think that's a similar experience that you have in D&D, where if the dungeon master is creating a world for you, where and the players on the table are like you said, you know, sort of assisting each other and collaborating, there is that vibe that is very similar. Now, here's my first seamless transition. Beautiful.
Beautiful. I love it.
If there are qualities, I was just looking at your guest list, and as far as building a quality world in the Dungeons and Dragons sort of platform, you have, you know, the Mount Rushmore of DMs that have graced your microphones as guests. And I think Bodhi mentioned it at the beginning, you know, that heart palpitation moment. Now, I know some of you, you know, if you're bumping into Chris Perkins at the coffee machine every other day, maybe it doesn't happen as much. But from our position, Chris Perkins started it all for us. Like legitimately started it all for us.
Acquisitions Inc. was the first thing we watched and we dove into because of Acquisitions.
It was over after that. Like, you know, that table, what they did, that was, you know, they're the OGs for sure for us. But for you, what is, when you think about their accomplishments, or just like that heart palpitating moment of guests that you've had on your Dragon Talk, what were a couple of yours that you really remember that experience, that feeling?
Well, the funny thing is that the Acquisitions Incorporated was super important for us as well, because it was also where the Dragon Talk feed started. The RSS feed for our podcast was the same one that Perkins was on back in 2008 when he first played with those folks. And so when we kind of were doing the rebrand, because it used to be called just the official Dungeons and Dragons podcast, it didn't have a name other than that. And so we did a little bit of rebranding and kind of looking at what was on that feed. I was able to go back and listen to those first episodes, and I was like, oh, wait, what? This is where it started? And it morphed into more of an interview show that sometimes the designers were doing to talk about their ideas and mechanics and things like that. And then soon the marketing team kind of took it over, and we're Shelly and Bart Carroll were figuring out how to transition into more of what it is now, which is the weekly interview show. But yeah, it all started from there. And to your specific question, there were tons of people that we talked to that we were actually just surprised that they said yes early on. I think the one for me was Joe Manganiello. Being able to speak to him, he was lucky enough to be in the office, so we were in person, and he's a much taller person than you might think. At least I was like, oh yeah, no, I see him. He's not that much bigger than anybody you see on TV, and then you see him in person, and you're like, oh, you're like a foot and inches taller and wider than all of us in the right places, not me, which is mostly in the midriff area where I'm wider. His shoulders were quite broad.
We're all there, brother. It's all good.
And then I had to research his name, how to say his name, because I didn't want to say it wrong, and luckily there's a lot of videos of him teaching people how to say his name. I had to practice Manganiello over and over and again to get it right. But he was adorable and wonderful and just like a really great guest, and I think he put us at ease more than anything else. One of my funniest parts was when we were also doing it on camera. We were just started doing more Twitch stuff, and he was wearing a hat that had like a brim all the way around. And we're like, oh yeah, but you got to have headphones on. And we had, the headphones that we're wearing here. We didn't have earbuds at the time. And he was like, how do I do this without taking off my hat? He didn't want to take off his hat in order to, be seen on camera with his hair not looking as awesome as it could be. And so he ended up like putting it behind and all that stuff. But I just once those were before we started, recording some of those moments, and I think that kind of put me at ease a little bit to be like, oh yeah, no, he's just a person, just like anybody else is. He's got the same, foibles and things that everyone else is. I don't know, Shelly, what do you think? I know you were also very nervous to talk to Joe.
Terrified to talk to Joe. I was also terrified to send him the essay that I wrote about him in our book, Welcome to Dragon Talk, because I kind of like don't want him just to like discover I wrote about him and then he's like angry at Wizard, like, why would you let her write this about me? My beefy biceps or whatever. I think I actually used the word like beefy biceps.
How else are you going to describe them? Let's be real.
Hey, it's my experience, okay? My truth. So I sent him that essay, and he responded right away, and he was like, I love it. It's so cool. Just a correction though. Like, it was actually this town in Maine that I learned how to play, or it was my aunt, not my cousin. That I'm like, oh, okay, yeah, wonderful. And then he started giving me more details. He was like, do you want to write about how I contributed to Descent into Avernus? Because I did. And like, oh, and that time that you're mentioning when I was in the office, I was actually there to talk about whatever. I'm like, oh, okay, sure. And then he ended up giving us even like a nice blurb to put on the book where he refers to us as Regis and Kathy Lee. So I mean,
I did see that quote. That's a great quote. It's a great quote.
Yeah, so he actually is just as nerdy as anyone when it comes to Dungeons and Dragons. But I still get like a little clammy when I think about another guest that I was really nervous to talk to you, and that's Emily Axford, who is an actress and from the Not Another D&D podcast. Yeah. But we actually interviewed Brian Murphy first.
Yeah.
And I was trying to play it cool because I'm not as like nervous to talk to him, but knowing that he was married to Emily, because I was just a huge fan of her work. And then at the end of the podcast, I mentioned something like, I'm a really big fan of Emily. And he goes, oh, she's right here. And I was like, oh no, don't tell her. But then she ended up agreeing to be on Dragon Talk. Oh, I was so nervous. If we could have had alcohol in the office, I definitely would have. Had to have a few drinks before
Take
that.
the edge off.
Yeah, it's like I don't want her to think I'm such a nerd, but I also don't want her to not be as cool as I think she is in real life. She totally is, and she was so nice, and she was just so friendly and so funny, and that ended up being one of my favorite Dragon Talk interviews of all time, and it's just really proves the fact that D&D is a great equalizer, that no matter who you are, you can talk to anybody about this game because everybody's just genuinely excited to share their D&D experiences, and then they can go back to making blockbuster movies, and you can go back to your desk and send an email or make a PowerPoint, whatever. But yeah, D&D just levels the playing field for all of us.
I love that in that interview too. She kind of tricked you into dungeon mastering
She did.
live on microphone, and it was like the best thing ever because that was in the throes of when you're like, I don't know if I can, like, similar to you, Tom, where you're like, I don't know if dungeon mastering is my thing. I just want to be a player, and I was like, no, you can do it. It's just that easy. And she made you do it. I think that might have been the first kind of chink in the armor of like, oh no, maybe I can do this. Here it is.
She did.
That's a pretty huge first. Let's all be real right now. DMing for every Oxford in a podcast. That's a pretty good first.
Like
as far as stories
a minute
to die
and a
on.
half. Yeah, it wasn't that long, but it was like, oh god, like I can't say. And I truly believe that she was like, you can DM for me anytime. I'll be a player. And I truly believe that if I said, okay, Emily, I'm gonna do a game, will you please be in it? I feel like she would have said, yeah, totally, I'm in. But
yes, and
too intimidated.
That's some real good improv right there. That right there is beautiful. Do you know what? I think it's such an interesting point of like, because we've had a couple of people as well where we've been like, oh my god, and actually a lot of them have actually been outside of the D&D space, which has been really, really weird for us in terms of we've had a couple of UFC fighters, which has been wild, and some like skateboarders and stuff like that, and it's been one of those ones, like you said, where a lot of those people, the moment you talk to them, you're like, whoa, like those nerves carry over until like the first like maybe 5 minutes are gone, and then you're like, oh, this is just. It's a normal podcast. You're a normal person. I'm doing just as good as I hoped I would, or at least I'm maintaining my decorum for the moment, and things like that. So I think that's awesome. And obviously, want to ask you, obviously Emily's incredible, and are you a big Dimension 20 fan yourself? And all the stuff that they've done, as well as also the podcast that her and Brian do. Are you big fans of all of that kind of conducive work? Is that one that you regularly watch, Shelly, or are they not your staples?
I love all of the work that they do, and I will tune in when I can, but like time is limited, and the podcasts that I listen to are usually recapping The Bachelor or Real Housewives. I said what I said. What I said.
Oh, you just entered a dangerous territory, because I just finished Too Hot to Handle the other day on Netflix, and I've been I'm the reality TV person in my relationship.
Slippery slope right into The Bachelor.
You disappear. Yeah. I used to. Oh my God. What was the
Love
one?
Island? Love Island UK. Come on.
And also, what was the one back in the day? It was like Geeks, Beauty and the Geek. That was one that I used to love as well.
Yes.
Back in the day. See.
We should bring that
I got all kinds of facets to my personality. It's crazy. It's crazy.
You could host a podcast about anything.
Greg, should you and I just go have a drink and let them?
I know exactly. I was like,
so Greg loves reality TV.
Can we talk about how it's bad for humanity, and it actually is a net negative on the world?
Dare you? I do believe what Christina Ariel is an excellent example of somebody who can blend both of those worlds. And when her and I get talking about reality TV, we come up with some amazing story hooks, and also reality TV villains make excellent NPCs. Just saying.
That's a great shout. Not to mention as well, it's a beautiful social experiment to just watch us humans doing things that you just never get to see us do in like any other situation. Like we're such strange beings and social creatures. It's so weird, dude.
It really is.
Can I offer you the counterpoint for anyone in the audience that might be wanting a counterpoint?
I don't think so. I don't want to hear it.
Okay, well, maybe just hit mute for a second. And then,
Preach, please.
Here's what I cannot get my head around. You've got like Bear Grylls out in the forest, and he says, all I've had is a slice of bread for the last day and a half, and I'm just surviving on this thimble full of water. And I'm thinking to myself, dude, there's a cameraman right there.
Right.
He's right there. There's lighting here. There's a
boom guy.
There's a support team. And I cannot get around that often with reality. I always think about, okay, it kind of feels real, but there's a crew there, and there's lighting, and they want to take out shadows, and they want to make sure your sound is good, and that's the bit that hurts me a little.
But they're not feeding him, allegedly.
Allegedly. They totally are.
Unless he really is starving, and then I bet they would.
Part of me, as someone who loves storytelling and loves writing, I'm like, I'd much rather just watch something that has craft and intention behind it. I don't believe the reality. It's not real in any way. It's just put upon.
Isn't that storytelling too, though? That they are a little bit produced.
Yeah, but
they are coming up with
storytelling. It's just like, oh man, this person is just doing this because they think it's funny and it's going to get a laugh. I'd rather just actually have people do that.
We didn't want to be the podcast that broke up Dragon Talk.
Yeah.
This is well covered territory.
This is our last podcast.
This is actually the only thing that we very truly disagree on, and
this
it is fun
actually,
for us to banter about it. This is real banter.
I just came up with something that Bodhi, you have just maybe given me a little bit of ammunition on why on like making more connections between D&D and reality TV. Is you're saying that you can see people doing things that you wouldn't normally see them doing, and with D&D, a lot of when I play a character, I am absolutely playing against who I am in real life, because I don't get to do those things in real life. I find great pleasure in not thinking about my actions. I love playing impetuous characters that are just like, I'm gonna just be mean to this person, don't care, I'm gonna wreck their little statue garden here and just destroy it. And I'm gonna I don't care. It's what I feel like I want to do. And in real life, I'm always so like deliberate and thoughtful and like control freak. And I don't want to do that. D&D gives me that space to explore what does it feel like to be a little bit chaotic. And I kind of feel like reality TV might also unleash that in me, because I am seeing people in scenarios that I would never do. Like, I am not inviting a friend to a restaurant so I can scream at her for 12 minutes and then throw my wine in her face. Like, I would not do that. But in some
really,
like,
I thought that was like your Tuesday. Is that not your Tuesday?
I wouldn't waste the wine, Bodhi. Okay?
Good point. That's a good point.
No, we drink the wine. But I wonder if it's not something like, don't think I haven't thought about throwing a glass of wine in somebody's face. I just won't do it. So maybe there is something about watching people behave in a way that like
cathartic.
Like we can't do that in real life, but wow, it's sort of entertaining to see people doing it. And also with D&D, like there is like a safe space. Like I'm watching, like I will not be impacted. I will not feel drops of Chardonnay on my own face watching the wine get spilled. So it is kind of like a safe area too. I'm gonna explore that more.
No, I you know what? I'm gonna take
to that.
Yeah, exactly.
I agree.
I think so. Here's another analogy.
Okay.
So we like UFC and other mixed martial arts, which are very, very competitive and very real. And I used to, well, I still haven't watched it, but I got an argument against my deep opposition to World Wrestling Federation, wrestling. Because I was just like, it's fake. It's why? And then this person said, dude, it's storytelling. They are talented. There's an arc to each character. There's a villain. There's a baby face. There's, and I was like, holy shit, you know what? It is kind of like theater. And I think to your point, Shelly,
it's like watching a movie. All of a movie is choreographed the same way wrestling is. Just because you love watching Captain America kick Thanos' ass doesn't mean you're not going to enjoy, Triple H or
whatever
name any of that. I think he's like 70 at this point. I don't know.
Here's the reach to reality TV. My wife right now is watching The Mole.
Oh, it's so good.
Well, no.
Oh, it's so good. Oh, it's so good. I'm already.
this might be the end of our
I'm
podcast.
catching up on the new episodes tonight. That's what I'm finishing tonight.
Bodie, you want to start a podcast together?
Oh no,
I
it
do.
just happened.
Yeah, so Tracy, my wife Tracy's watching The Mole, and I watched the first episode with her, as you know, as you do to participate in couple, like, you know, couple compromise.
Right.
And so I'm watching it, and I'm just poking holes in it in my head, and then after the episode, I think we watched 2 actually. After the second episode, I was like, you know what? Feel free to just, you know, watch as you can, and I'll pick up as we go, lightly saying I'm out. You know, I've had enough.
Yes, that's nice.
But to your point, the producers of The Mole are like DMs, right?
Mhm.
Yes.
They are pulling the strings, however orchestrated or
They're
unorchestrated,
railroading in certain ways. They're
however
not in other
scripted
ways.
or organic it is.
That's a good point.
They're
Yes.
putting out they're presenting a story. And so I think that's what I'm getting now from reality TV, that I've never really connected the dots, because I've never gotten around a lot of the stuff that just annoys me. but it is a story. It's storytelling.
It is. It's a different medium.
Yeah, I guess. Yeah. What do you think, Greg? Are you gonna?
Greg's like dead in the eyes. Greg's like,
Yeah,
like,
I'm like,
"Fuck you
okay,
guys."
I've heard these arguments before. Yeah, well, to me, and then why I say it's a net negative is because it is storytelling. It's just storytelling that seems to elevate the worst in people every single time. It's not about, to me, like, there's no uplifting stories in reality. There's no people who are like, wow, I'm actually going to do some good in the world. It always seems to skew towards assholes or people who are mean and disrespectful to each other. And that's the part that kills me. I'm like, I don't like watching that. I'd sometimes like watching characters be like that in movies and television. Most of the time, they have a resolution. They get better.
Right.
They learn that they're bad. These people are rewarded for being bad. They are told to be bad in this weird reality world. They're encouraged to be bad. They're actually play acting as evil people. And I find that kind of gross. I don't like it. It makes me feel gross. And it makes me feel evil by consuming it. And everyone who does consume it is also evil. Just throwing that out.
Just as a little, listen, that was just a little aside.
That's the clip. That's the clip we're promoting with. That's the clip right there.
Perhaps chaotic evil. So I mean, we'll bring it back to D&D a little bit there.
Wow.
You know what? Here's my first seamless transition. Hear me out, guys.
Okay. Get us out of this.
Here we go. So with, you know, all this amazing content that you guys have compiled over the years, it's, you know, hours and hours and hours and hours of content that you guys have compiled. Very similar to the hours and hours of reality TV that me and Shelly binge. There you go. There's the transition.
I like it.
I want to know what led to you guys. You know, you continue to do the podcast. You're having all these incredible guests. You're putting out amazing content. What pushed you guys to be like, you know what, we need to put this into something that people can hold, that they can read. These conversations are important to people, and you know, it's something that deserves to be out there in the public in another medium, and maybe a more, I wouldn't say more digestible, because I don't feel like it's more digestible for certain people, but maybe a way that's more condensed or something like that, you know, for people. What led you guys to make the decision to write the book with the longest title I've ever seen in history?
That's all Shelly. In both cats, it's all Shelly.
I can't write a book without a long subtitle. Do the subtitles do the heavy lifting. That is basically our elevator pitch right there.
I did enjoy reading your bio and seeing the different names of your books and being like, okay, there's a trend here. I see. It's like a haiku. It's a poem.
Still going. Yes.
Sorry, continue.
I really wish we thought of this idea. I really do, because now that it exists, I can see that it's important. But I was actually approached by an editor at University of Iowa Press, who is a Dragon Talk listener and had read my previous books and said, hey, I think there's a story here. Would love to explore doing a book about Dragon Talk. And in her mind, she was thinking like behind the scenes, the creative process of how we put together this podcast about this huge fandom that is D&D. And I thought, well, at first I was like, that's spam. So I'm just not going to respond to this email. And for like 2 weeks. And then I Googled her. I'm like, oh, she's real. Okay. Well, sure. I'll write back to her. And I obviously was very intrigued by the idea, but it seemed like the real story there was the guests, were the people that the community that we get to talk to. So obviously doing anything about Dragon Talk feels like it's Greg and I. Like let's like Greg is instrumental in why Dragon Talk exists, why Dragon Talk has a name, why Dragon Talk comes out on a weekly basis instead of when we feel like it. Like it's Greg made it a real podcast. And also like Greg was really the one that had the vision of what Dragon Talk could and should be. And that was about elevating this community and bringing attention to the work that people are doing and really showing that anyone can and should play Dungeons and Dragons, that there are people from all different mediums, people from the world of entertainment, the people who use D&D in everyday part of their job, they're creating content around D&D, or people who are doing something totally different, but say, I got here because of D&D. There's so many cool stories to tell. So Greg and I worked on a book proposal for what we felt like the book should be about. And yeah, we talk about Dragon Talk's origin story, and Greg writes an amazing first chapter about the history of Dungeons and Dragons too, and which I think is really important in framing the rest of the book. And that's how that was what the editor, she also saw that vision, was like, yeah, this feels right. Let's focus on the community. And then Greg and I thought about, well, now, okay, great. So now we have to write this. And now there's over like almost 300 interviews. How are we going to narrow it down to, 29 or 30? And we came up with our list of interviews that really were like just bubbled to the top immediately. Like this person really inspired me in some way, or I was really deeply impacted by what this person said. And we had a list that actually didn't even have that many crossovers, which was really weird, because we were thinking like, we're just going to want to write about the same people. And nope, we didn't. Like, there was, not to say that they weren't all inspiring in their own way, but they just really, they connected with us differently. And in some ways, like, I was reading Greg's half of the proposal, I'm like, wow, really, I had no idea that Greg was so moved by what happened here. Clearly we both have a type as well. Like, I get really excited about like people who use D&D in their therapeutic practice, or people who are like teaching kids how to play. And Greg really loves the performers who are inspired by D&D as well. So definitely we definitely saw like, oh yeah, this one's definitely got your name written all over it. But yeah, I feel like I'm glad
were the words bulky biceps in there anywhere?
Beefy.
I was like, I want to write about the beefy biceps.
Yeah, I don't know if Greg could have pulled that off as well. Maybe, I don't know. But yeah, it is what it's turned out to be, is really a love letter to the Dungeons and Dragons community, and that it was our goal to not just entertain people with some of the stories that we've encountered through the 7 years of doing this podcast, but really to show people that this game is for everyone, and that this game really does make a lasting impression on people in a positive way. And that hopefully, if you haven't found yourself in a D&D game, or if you don't know that much about D&D, after reading this book, hopefully you'll see that D&D is actually for you as well, and that there's space in this community for everyone.
Wow. I just want to say that was beautifully put, so eloquent, and I think
thank you.
No, of course, and I think so much of what you said. I love what you said about this being a love letter, to the community, and I think with Greg writing about the history of D&D, it feels like that. It feels like you're really giving us something that is a deeper insight into people that we love, things that means a lot to many people in this community, and like you said, and I would say actually in a lot of cases your guys' type is very much, I think, a lot of other people's type as well. Like a lot of people do this for, like you said, therapeutic stuff, whether it be, for children at schools, after school activities, whether it be, in a mental health hospital, whether it be, to cheer up a friend who's, having a bad week, or, whatever it might be. That's a super, super common one. And then I think on Greg's side, so many people, like, look, as far as I go as a person and what I would like to achieve in life, after rediscovering D&D and getting to the point where I am, I would like to, and I'm one of those. Tom gave me this in the personality that we share. He gave me drive and passion for things. Like, my mother is like the chaos and fun, and Tom is like my drive and the ability to want to achieve and want to be successful and all that kind of stuff. And so for me, I want to be the best dungeon master in the world. By the time I die, I want to look back and say, I'm the best. I did it. I'm the Kobe Bryant. I'm the, the Michael Jordan, whatever. And, I want to be able to look back and be like, I did it. And I think for me, loving the performers, watching Brennan Lee Mulligan, watching Matt Mercer, watching Chris Perkins, watching Abria, watching, any of these incredible dungeon masters do their craft. There's never a moment where I'm going, oh man, I got that on lock, because I'm constantly learning from them. And, they all have 30 years on me at this point as DMs, and so I sit very much on the side of, I do it for therapy for a lot of people. Like I said, I have a lot of new players come in, and I do it for like that kind of thing of like for my friends and to help friends out and to do that kind of thing. But I also get that side where every time I DM, I'm thinking about what can I do better? How can I be better? And how can I look at what other people are doing? Who's a new podcast that I can absorb and see a new DM style that I've never seen before and learn something, different from that? And I think it feels like the community is very much in those kind. Oh, I would say there's a third space of just pure fun chaos, but that's that's neither here nor there. But that's
totally, yeah. Well,
that's
and I
just where
think,
kinda stand
along
on it.
those lines, along those like wanting to kind of make your mark, I don't think this was an intention when we were putting together the book proposal or even writing for most of it. But looking back on it now, I think that this book is in some ways a record of this amazing period in Dungeons and Dragons, the growth, the change that has happened. I mean, because again, 2015 was only 7 years ago. It's when I started at Wizards of the Coast. I've said this in a bunch of interviews, so apologies for people who've heard this many times before. But I started the same week that Critical Role aired for the first time on Twitch, and that was a sea change of that whole entire fandom, right? Like that, the fact that people could watch others play Dungeons and Dragons as readily and listen to them on podcasts, like it just blew up after that in 2015, and it changed everything. And it was this really big growth moment with the community. And so I'm really happy that this book is in some ways a record of that. It's in some ways of looking at all the different people who have been it, some of them for decades, but some of them who have also just come into it in the last few years, like you guys, and witnessing that and showing what we did on the D&D brand a little bit. There's a little bit of inside baseball about like how we encouraged this growth and continued moving forward, as well as all of the people that we speak to that came into it and felt that they found their people from way different backgrounds, and that one of the underlying tenets of if you're not getting it from all of us, that we all have different interests. We all have things that are not just D&D, and that's good. That is what makes this community have all of its strengths. That's why all of the different breadth of the essays in here of the guests that we go into just speak to the strength of this community and how it's important, is because it comes from so many different backgrounds. And I'm just happy to be able to have this book and be like, yeah, no, this is a record of this time and of this growth. It's really kind of cool.
So what you're basically saying is that when the nuclear apocalypse happens, you want some lucky child to pick up your book and receive radiation poisoning from the beautiful book
Yes.
That's the one. And I just want to clarify as well, just so you guys don't think I'm crazy. I also understand that there is no best DM out there as well. Like that's just a weird sick thing in my head that I have to fulfill for myself. But we're all so different, and everyone's got such unique styles that I think that's also important. Every DM is just as good as another. It's just style differences. It's tone of how you play, your preferred method of play, all that kind of stuff. So
I took what you said as the best that you can be, like the best
Yes.
GM that you can be out there, right?
Thank you. I'm
I
so
took
glad you
it-
didn't see me as an asshole.
I took
it
it
was
like
like
you
this guy's a
wanted to-
dick.
That you were like, I'm gonna take down Chris Perkins.
That's exactly
I'm
what
gonna find
MMA
him. I'm gonna knock on his
style.
door.
He-
Yo, Chris,
he
what's up,
also-
dude?
He also has martial arts training, so you need to be careful.
And or spar with him immediately.
Be careful.
And he may actually be a real live wizard. We are not sure yet. But-
Dude, let's be real. If
He
there's
does not
ever
age.
going to be someone, he's going to be the one that be like, him, Ian McKellen, Patrick Stewart. Let's get this out onto the table,
Oh,
guys.
he
Let's
would
get
love
this
that.
out into the table. Do you know what I mean? Christopher
Yeah.
Lee when he was alive, but only so much. we
Well,
can
I mean,
do at
he's
this
still
point.
with us somewhere, right? Christopher Lee
Yes.
didn't actually die. He's still
Just ascended to a different plane, right?
yeah,
What were you going to say? Sorry.
No, I think just circling all the way back to sort of the beginning of this conversation when we're talking about what is the thing, and it sounds
Yeah.
like the book is a way to try to capture that in different ways from different people and different perspectives, and that's I was just thinking like the penny dropped for me just now. Like you've got a book that has information, interesting conversations about people that we really, really aspire to know more about, So, we've just named a few of them, but like that's actually really,
And the list
like-
is crazy.
and it was
The list is
under
crazy.
your nose for all that time, and I'm sure the penny dropped for you guys at one moment, at some point, and you were like, holy shit, like we do have a really cool story that we can share. But, we can curate this information and present it in a way that it's desirable for people that really admire these people.
Do you know what I think is an important
Yeah.
question that I want to ask you guys? Because we have been dreaming that someone at some point down the line will ask us this question when we're as worldly successful as you guys possible. We would love to hear, because we talk about every day, we're like, man, there's not an easy day at Homie and the Dude. We're every hurdle that could be in front of us is right there in front of us, and we're hitting them. So I wanted to ask, what have been some of the struggles to get you guys to this point? What have been some of the things that you guys have overcome, whether it be, life, work, this podcast, your guys' relationship? What have been some things that have got you to this point, in this, got us to this love letter where you have captured that feeling about what D&D is in this, amazing book? What have been some stuff that you guys have encountered throughout the years?
Do you have something, Shelly?
So a lot of times, and I think this is true with any creative endeavor that you put out there, you work hard on something and you don't know who's consuming it or what it means to people, or if anyone even finds it. Dragon Talk takes, like, we have day jobs, and this is like, we're lucky enough to get to do this, but have always been times more like, is anyone even like listening to this thing? Like it does, like, you don't know. And then like, we'll like hear from like one person that's like, hey, I just want to let you know, I really love Dragon Talk. Thanks. Bye. Like send us an email on our Dragon Talk email. And we're like, oh my God, really? You do? Okay. We're going to keep going. We're going to keep doing this. But it's like, there are those highs and lows with anything that you put a lot of your love and your passion and your energy into. And there's always going to be those moments where you're like, is it worth it? Should I keep going? And I think for us, it became really obvious that yes, we should keep going, because it's important, not just to us, but it's important to not just the people that we get to talk to on the show, but it's important for the community. It's important for people to get a chance to hear from the creators that they haven't discovered yet, or creators that they do love and follow and want to hear more about. And important for people who are like, hey, like, I also make maps. Like, maybe one day I'm going to, be on Dragon Talk, or I'm going to put my map in an official D&D book or something. Like, it's just, it makes it, I think it just, it makes it more accessible to a lot of people. And there's a million reasons why we want to keep this going. But I think also we were so heads down writing the book, and then like the book, and then it goes away. And then it's like, you don't hear from any, because publishing moves like at a snail's pace. So the book's gone. It's edited, and they'll hopefully our editor will email us again one day. And yeah, and now we're back to like, hey, your book's actually getting printed. There's a hard copy in the world. And I don't feel like it was as obvious to it, and Greg speak to this too, of course, but for me, like how excited I am for this book to come out since we've started talking about the book. And now I'm like, God, like, yes, like this book is like, we have an amazing community here. Like amazing people play and love Dungeons and Dragons. And going back to what you said, Tom, about the thing, you're right. The thing is different for people. Like there is a thing, but it does mean something different to different people. And I think that this book captures that too.
Yeah.
And so I'm really like more excited than ever just about introducing Dungeons and Dragons in a new way to so many people, or I hope at least a few people. But
Yeah.
That's all. What about you, Greg? Anything that you felt, was a hurdle that, on your end that was something you had to deal with, or creative things, as Shelly mentioned?
Well, there's always behind the scenes creative pitfalls, whatever, as you're making anything. So there's a lot of that, but I think what really drew me to one particular answer about your question was the essay I have written about the conversations we've had with B. Dave Walters over the years. I think we've had him on 3 times. And in it, he talks about being a fighter mage thief. He loves being the type of, class that takes a long time to level up. And that's echoed in his story where he's much older than he appears, and has been working towards kind of the amount of notoriety and awesomeness that he has within the D&D community right now. But it didn't start that way, and we had him on around when the pandemic started. I think it was March or April 2020, and we kept going. We transitioned pretty quickly. I think we maybe took 1 week, maybe 2 weeks off from recording Dragon Talk episodes. We did it in the studio at work at the office, and then once that all shut down, we shifted to the physical locations that we're at right now, talking to you right now, and moved our equipment here so that we could both stream and do the live recording of the podcast from our homes. And we had B. Dave on, and he genuinely thanked us. He was like, "Thank you for continuing to make this content while everything else is a hellfire of Avernus around us, in everything that's going in the pandemic." And I needed to hear that at that moment. Because I was, should we even keep doing this? Like, there's so many more important things in the world that are going on. Like, who cares about this? At the time I was thinking silly podcast where people are talking about Dungeons and Dragons. Like, let's, maybe we should take a longer hiatus here. And he was the one who said, like, no, I think it's important to keep a sense of normalcy, to keep fandoms going, to keep things that aren't on fire in people's minds, to have something to look forward to. I don't want to go too Lord of the Rings on this, but like, no, that's what we're fighting for. But like, in some ways, he kind of coalesced that for us and inspired at least me to be like, okay, what we are doing is important, and it is meaningful to not only the guests that we have on, but to the audience and the community out there. And so that's why I think B. Dave is actually not just a fighter mage thief; he is a fighter mage thief cleric. Because he, almost gave us that kind of spiritual guidance that we needed at the right moment, at the right time to kind of lift us up, which has been also a big part of this. It's like, we like to lift up the people from the community and make it happen. And I think that was not our intention when we started. We didn't have that as a bullet point on the whiteboard. It was like, we're going to lift up people, but that came organically throughout it. Is we see ourselves as caretakers and stewards, and this little part of the D&D community, and wanting to highlight the amazing things that people are doing, and that is important. And so that was a challenge at first to be like, do we want to keep doing this? And then we were like, yeah, we do, because it has all of the things that we've been talking about. Why Dungeons and Dragons is so important to so many people. This podcast is a big part of making sure everyone feels that too, going forward. And so even if whether you're doing it online or having a D&D game that's public, or you're just doing it for your private community, it could even just be in your family or just a one-on-one game. Like, you're doing amazing stuff in keeping the storytelling of your Dungeons and Dragons sessions going. And so I just want to make sure everybody out there knows that.
That's
Nice.
thank you both for for those very eloquent responses. And I just want to.
My little heart is a little warm right now.
It's growing 3 sizes.
Well, that is the point. That is the point. So, yes, I'm gonna say that D&D in itself, as it sits, is a spectacular, wonderful thing. But I think you two as messengers are pretty cool. And the audience that you're inspiring, your community, well, I would say that we just now, I know for me, we're in the wilderness that you have spoken of. And we have had little moments of confirmation to keep moving forward. But your words are definitely like, they resonate for us.
Yeah, 100%. And also, I just wanted to say this as well, like, Shelly, like, just to you personally, like, sorry, Greg, for this.
This is the reality show.
This is the reality television connections talking
right
right
now.
here.
Got you.
It's actually more just, I've met a lot of dudes that play D&D, a lot of guys, a lot of people who identify as men play D&D, it seems. And for me, it's so awesome to have such a leader in this community be yourself, Shelly, and be, someone who represents, a group of people that sometimes within the TTRPG space don't always get represented as much. And, it's why I love, Abria Iyengar and what she does. Why I think she is one of the greatest dungeon masters to ever touch this planet. She's unfreaking believable. And, it's one of those things that I think we need more of that. And I specifically think, I'm not sure how many people out there, I feel like, we try and tell people, we're all about family, and, you can do it with your family, you can spend time with your family, you can do it with your friends, that kind of thing. But I think, for young women, young, non-binary, all these kinds of groups of people out there that don't always have those strong role models that we especially us as white men, even more so have, I just love it. And I think the way that you just spoke about, this book and how you feel about the community and whatnot, there's not enough women out there and people out there doing that. And I really, really just wanted to say, I appreciate that. And I think so many young people need to read your book. They need to hear that, and they need to know, like you said, that this is the safest space. We are the safest space. And I've been on Twitter for years now, and I've never been in a community where everyone's like, great job, awesome. It's always like, your art sucks, man, and you're like, oh, and so it's nice to be in this community that loves each other and supports each other. And I think we need more of that. And I just really appreciate what both of you said. It was gnarly to actually hear that in person, I must admit. It's pretty great to see leaders of our community as yourselves being as passionate, driving this forward and just being amazing people, because it does inspire, jabronis like us to pick up a mic and maybe play a game of D&D live, or even just talk to people like yourself. And so without people like you, we don't get to this place, and other people don't get to where we were and where you guys were when it all started. And so I just hope that everyone who listens to this not only gets excited about D&D, but also if you are interested in creating stuff, in writing a book, having a podcast, making an actual play series, whatever you're, go for it. You'd be surprised how much fun it can be, how much work it will be, but also how fulfilling it is in some weird way as well to be able to contribute to this community and be a part of it in a way that isn't just quietly with family and friends at home. It's a really fun space to join in. You start rubbing shoulders with incredible people like we've done today, and we feel so honored to have been able to chat to you guys today. It's one of those things. We've been looking at you from afar for a while, and it's been like, one day we're coming for that, coming for you guys. We're gonna come and knock on the door.
Fully believe it and hope so. And you're literally making me tear up a little with kind words.
No, honestly, like I said,
can we talk about reality TV again?
That's gonna make me cry.
Yeah, Greg and Tom are gonna start crying.
And now Greg's gonna start crying.
Tears of anger.
Amazing.
Well, you know what, guys? I feel like this is a perfect place place for us to say, you know what, thank you so much for gracing us with your time, your presence. Thank you so much for creating, a place for people to listen to amazing people and yourselves. Thank you for writing a book that will hopefully lead generations towards the D&D agenda that we are trying to push on the world.
The D&D agenda. Why didn't we call it that? That's a great title.
Agenda, that is good.
Write that book, you guys.
There's still time.
Yeah, right. Here, I'll rip off this cover and put a new one.
Oh, show that to the camera. Let me see that.
Yeah, look, we got the cover.
Yeah.
Very
Love
cool.
it.
It's a real book.
So perfect time, guys. Shout out the book. Shout out where can people find you guys on the socials, on the not socials? Shout out your guys' selves. Take the time to plug all your stuff and everything. Go for it.
Yeah, you can get the book at the University of Iowa Press. It's available for pre-order right now. You can, just put that in the Google bar and do that, but you can pre-order it through your local bookseller. That is awesome. We definitely want to support everybody who's doing local retail in that regard. You can get it from other online retailers, but it is available for pre-order. The official publication date is December 5th, but we're told if you pre-order, you can actually get it up to a month early, depending. I don't know if we can get it in the UK that early, but you can potentially get it before December 5th, which is awesome. We can't wait for people to start reading it and getting more into it. It makes a great gift for people who may not even just be fans of D&D, because I think it is a great introduction. We start off by talking about what is D&D and give a lot of context for the community and how it grew from the 70s to now. And so I think it is in some ways a nice way to be like, hey, if you're D&D curious, here's a way to make it not seem like many of the old stereotypes that used to be. Like, this is we try to shed all of that away in this book. And I think what you said, Bodhi, about Shelly being a guiding light for so many women out there, I think it's very true, and it's something that has been a big part of everything we've been doing at Dragon Talk. And I just want more people to play it. Maybe even people like Shelly who might not have wanted to play it when they were kids, now want to take that leap. And I think now's the right time. So yeah, that's my pitch on that thing. I'm at Greg Tito on Twitter, Greg_Tito on Instagram. And that's all I'm going to plug right now. Go for it, Shelly.
Okay. Thank you for all of the other plugging of the book, Greg. Did you plug Dragon Talk? I mean,
the podcast. You can watch the podcast. Listen to the podcast.
You can listen to the podcast as
Greg,
well.
did you plug the fucking thing?
You had one job, Greg. You had one job, Greg.
I'm gonna flip this table just like they do in Housewives.
Right. Not all of them flip tables, Greg. You're making a very broad generalization. It's only in New Jersey.
Yeah.
I am at Shelly Moo on Twitter and Instagram, and you can also, if you like to read about reality TV, come to my website at shellymazzanoble.com, and you can check out all my old Bachelor recaps there.
Hell yes.
Yes.
Hell to the yes. Well, as always, we've been Homie and the Dude, your father and son TTRPG and MMA team. Couple of things for us. We do have our actual play live stream, which is set in a world of floating islands with corruption, oppression, and rebellion seeping from all the cracks. And that's a really fun one for people to check out. It's in my homebrew world called the Sky Realm. It's a really, really interesting space. We got an incredible cast of players. Absolutely love them. They're amazing. Other than that, we also have a Discord server. So if you want to ask us any questions, you want to find out anything about guests that we've talked to, find out behind the scenes content, get information early, and most importantly, get updates on our upcoming Airship Combat D&D 5e overlay Kickstarter that will be coming very, very soon. And so, outside of that as well, the final thing is our newsletter of holding. If you want to, again, get free supplements from us, we give out NPCs from my world, we give out creatures from our world. You also get entered into our family-made dice giveaways, because we happen to make dice here and there as well.
Nice.
And
in our spare time.
In our spare time.
Yeah, right.
But if you're interested in any of that, there'll be links to all of that in the description. There'll be links to all of Greg and Shelly's stuff in the description as well. Guys, thank you so much for bloody watching. Anything from you, Big Dog, before we close it out?
Just thank you, Greg and Shelly, for your time. We will look out for the book, and we'll see you down the road. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank
you. I'm excited for the Homie and the Sis new podcast on housewives and The Only Way is Essex and all that stuff.
Oh, you're
Quick
making an
point
assumption there on who Homie is.
I was about
I
to say,
am. That's right.
quick point. Is that
Those are the guesses.
is that your guess?
I think,
Both
Bodhi,
Homie
you are
and-
the homie.
I think so
Okay.
too.
Okay.
All right.
Okay.
All right.
That's
We're
not
not
bad
going
guesses.
to reveal the answer online, but we will tell you possibly.
Okay.
Yes.
But we will see that the
And
answer
no.
It is bowls.
It's the Schrodinger's podcast.
You can't know until you look in the box. But then when you're looking in the box,
I gotta watch that video.
amazing, guys. Thank you so much.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you. This has been awesome.
Hey guys, thank you so much for watching Homie and the Dude today. We hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please hit us with the Holy Trinity. Go follow us on Twitter, subscribe to the YouTube channel, and like the Facebook. It's the best way that you can help us out at the moment. Hope you have an awesome day. Thanks for watching, guys.